I wanted to start today by casting my mind back. It was the year 1989 and I was just 7 years old. Back then, my parents would gently persuade me onto our physio bed, usually by inviting our pet Yorkshire Terrier, Rupert, onto the bed with me, or by sticking something cool on the TV like Transformers, Inspector Gadget, or in the mornings, Mr. Motivator. But on this particular day, I remember being a little bit disappointed because whilst Rupert was sat there with me, with Mum pretending to do his physio by patting his chest, which I always found hilarious despite the fact that Mum and Dad would crack the same joke every time. Surprisingly on this day, it was the news on the TV, as opposed to my favourite cartoons. And I just remember thinking, oh, boring. That was until Mum paused for a second and said, listen to this. One day in the not too distant future, they'll find a cure for you. Now it turns out that this was the day that they announced the discovery of the CF gene. I don't remember what was said, who presented the report, or anything else of the associated details, but I will always remember how excited my parents and my sister were following the announcement. You see, as a kid of 7, you don't really think beyond right now. You don't dwell on or remember too much about yesterday or what might come tomorrow. For me, it was a simple case of thinking, let's get this physio out of the way and I can get off to school and play with friends. And whilst it's quite rare for my parents to ever let on about the difficulty of bringing up a child with CF, they've always been quite open about the fact that the very early years were incredibly difficult. Mum sometimes closes that conversation by saying, one day I felt like dropping you off at the hospital and leaving you there because we had no answers whatsoever, and maybe that would force them to investigate further. Now, my assumption is that she would have come back to fetch me after the investigation, but I've never dared ask. Moving forward many years, and I think many of us would agree that the last few years in particular, second only to those moments in 1989, have arguably been the best and most incredible years for CF ever. For 90% of the CF community, we've been given genuine hope, thanks to what we now know is the most advanced, jaw-dropping and lung-clearing medication our community has ever seen. And trust me when I say this, because I kid you not, it's science so good, it almost feels like science fiction. Of course, beforehand, life was very different to what I currently experience. Whilst I count myself very lucky indeed for having made it this far, to say the last few years had been tough, I think would be somewhat of an understatement. CFers everywhere are pretty good at playing things down and how bad things get. And in some ways, I think it's just simply a coping mechanism. Because at its depths, CF can be a lonely, arduous existence where just getting out of bed and starting the day was almost as tiring as living through it. Whilst most reluctantly wake to the sound of their iPhone each morning, CFers from around the globe are only too familiar with a morning wake-up call that's altogether far more frustrating. Coughing. Uncontrollable coughing. I remember waking up just before the coughing fits began, and it was like I was frozen still. I knew that one slight move to the left or right would disturb what lurked in my lungs, and it would trigger the coughing. And the reason I felt so frozen was because I knew how long the coughing would last. The energy it would require to get through it, I knew it would put me off my breakfast. It would mean starting the day with a severe headache, and all this before I even sit down to get started with treatments, let alone head out to work and to live. And it's difficult to explain the cough, because let's face it, we've all had one, and it's not the end of the world when we do. So I'd forgive anyone for assuming that, well, it's just a cough. But it's a cough I've had for 37 years, every single day. And behind that cough, we all know is something far more sinister. Over time, the decline we experience compounds. The longer we're lucky enough to live for, unfortunately, the worse our quality of life becomes. It's a slow and steady decline where day to day the difference isn't perceived. Only when comparing life to how things felt a few years back do we have to accept the reality of the situation we find ourselves in. Around 18 months ago, my lungs were functioning at around the 30 to 32% range. And again, it's really difficult to explain how that feels. Gone are the controlled and rich, deep breaths that I was once used to from my childhood. And the most ordinary and basic tasks seem that much more strenuous and exhausting. And at this stage, CF is something that consumes life. It's no longer something that just we keep in check. It demands focus, it demands attention, and it has to come before everything else. Statistically speaking, these kinds of numbers might have suggested that I no longer had decades ahead, perhaps just a handful of years or so. But to slow down the rate of decline, we employ an arsenal of medications and treatments and therapies. And over time, these treatments have to ramp up. I often liken it to a race. Despite those early complications, I started out in life way out in front of CF. It wasn't in my way, but it could certainly see me out there in the distance, and it was doing its best to catch up. Fast forward, and not only did CF catch up, but it massively overtook me, leaving obstacles in my way, some of which were seemingly way too difficult to climb or avoid. Slowly but surely, CF was asking more of me, demanding more of my time. And 18 months ago, I was doing physio 3 times a day, spending up to 2 hours per session just to shift the rubbish on my chest. The only reason I stopped was through exhaustion or just simply admitting defeat. CF was just way too far out ahead now for me to even attempt to catch up. But whilst treatments have changed over the years and new things have come along, no treatment for CF has ever come close to the power of the latest one. Well, 3. Depending on which side of the Atlantic you find yourself on, they call it Trikafta or Kaftrio. But as for our community, we call it the game changer. 3 compounds: tezacaftor, ivacaftor, elexacaftor. When I say the words out loud, it almost feels like the words of some kind of magic spell, and perhaps rightly so, because on experiencing the results, it all feels like complete wizardry. Decrease in sweat chloride, less difficulty in breathing, less wheezing, less congestion, far less, and in most cases, on most days, no rubbish on my chest at all. And finally, thankfully, no cough. And I mean no cough. I now have that long, deep, rich breath that I once remembered. And my lung function has shot up almost as high as my quality of life and sense of freedom. And there's a reason I liken it all to wizardry and science fiction, and it's because this improvement was realised quite literally overnight. But there is a problem. Access to Trikafta is somewhat of a lottery. If you happen to have been born on the right piece of rock, you'll get it, and if you have the right type of CF. If you weren't or you don't, then you won't. The landscape, therefore, of what patients need from our CF teams now has never been so varied. For those of us lucky enough to have access, our needs have shifted. Many of us have reported much needed changes in weight. We've got less mucus in our lungs, which means we don't swallow as much during the day, leaving our bellies empty and our appetites through the roof. And add to that a changing and improving rate of absorption, and it leaves us in a position whereby our previously encouraged high fatty food diets are no longer adequate. Our body weight continues to rise along with the body fat percentage and bloating. What do we need from our CF team now? Well, in many cases, education, support, a personalised approach to diet that fits our new normal, that helps us find our new maintenance calories and improves our relationship with food. Some may even need emotional support in coming to terms with a changing body image and shape. What else? Well, for our entire lives, we've carried a rather heavy weight around with us. Life expectancy. We try to avoid the stats, but we all know they're there, and it places us in an uncertain position. Desperate, but scared to grow older. And of course, many of us didn't expect to grow old at all. Live for the moment, enjoy life while you have it. The future isn't promised. What do we need now? Well, some may need help in coming to terms with the concept of living longer, building a career, planning for the future, parenting. CFers need that emotional and practical support, and in my view, that starts with the team that knows them best. This isn't just a questionnaire with boxes to tick. It goes beyond that. We need to ensure that people with CF who potentially have their whole life ahead of them now have everything they need to thrive and enjoy the gift they've been given, and that their mental health is strong enough to match up to their newfound physical health. However, it's not just those on Trikafta whose needs are changing. Imagine being born somewhere where there is no glimmer of Trikafta even way out in the horizon ahead. What must that do to a person's state of well-being? The same goes for those who find themselves in the 10%, those who can't benefit from Trikafta due to genetic reasons. It starts for me by listening to the community as a whole, but also to individuals. What are their needs? How has this affected their mental health? And what can we do as a team to support them? We need to be sharing their stories, committing to progress and research, finding their TriKafta, and until then, ensure they stay well enough to receive it when it does emerge. It might be seen that access and campaigning is a topic beyond the remit of a CF team. You're here to keep them well today and provide the treatments and processes that they have access to right now. And yes, I'd agree with that, but in my view, the CF team should also play a role in helping make progress towards access and be at the forefront of news, research and trials, keeping CFers up to date with every bit of relevant information that could lead to a future breakthrough. Work with them to share stories and raise awareness, and don't leave the campaign for access to them and their families. Lead with them. Beyond treatment, what emotional and financial support do CFers in these groups have access to? It's often a complex topic, and I know here in the UK getting access to personal independence payments to help with finance is also a lottery. What are we doing to ensure our CFers who need it get it? And for me, again, it starts with the CF team. I think in general across all of these groups, TriKafta or not, we also long for more control. CF takes so much away from us, so we'd love to be in a position to take some of that control back. Things like access to data and devices that can give us a rolling view of our health, wearables, and personal lung function devices that connect us to our CF team from afar, like the Nuvo Air devices that, again, some of us have and just some of us don't. It should be standard. Devices and data that give us the ability to track our health means we no longer need a number of individual CF appointments dotted throughout the year. Instead, we have an ongoing data-driven appointment building confidence and reassurance, where we stand the best chance of building a closer, more personal relationship with our health and avoiding those previously inevitable nasty CF surprises. The world of CF has never been so varied. Our needs have evolved, and there are now clear segments within a community that all wants exactly the same thing. The opportunity for freedom. Freedom to work, live, and to breathe. The truth is that I can't speak on behalf of such a vast community. So I'll finish by repeating the question back to you all. Rather than what do our patients need from us now, ask yourself, what does this individual need from us now? And if there's one thing that we should all commit to, it is access to medication. CF can't wait, it won't wait. Whether we talk about those who find themselves in the 10% awaiting future medications, or those who are eligible for TriKafta right now and have no access. Perhaps all of our prayers would be answered if we stood together as a community, as a family, and a force to be reckoned with, and insisted on a global access plan that will truly transform and protect the lives of everyone within this incredible community. Cheers.